Hey guys, it's History Behind the Warrior, and today I'm very pleased to bring you something very exciting to the channel, and that is the early drafts of Mortal Kombat 11's creation. Unlike my typical history of formatted videos, we'll be going through a lot of Mortal Kombat 11's drafts before we got the final product. Now, whilst I myself could actually do it, I believe that there is no better person to do the job than one of the writers themselves, that's being former MK11 comic and 11 writer Shawn Kittlesen. Please do wish him some love, say thank you to him for actually making all of this possible, as we wouldn't know anything about these early drafts here. On top of this, Shawn no longer actually works for NetherRealm Studios. He now works at Skybound, so he by all intents and purposes had absolutely no reason to put this information out there. But Shawn is a passionate Mortal Kombat fan, and does wish to share his story of how Mortal Kombat 11 came to fruition, all of the ideas that were on the table, some that you're no doubt very excited for from the thumbnail alone. I'll be giving the floor to Shawn to basically do this video and explain the writing process of 11. It's actually a very intriguing way to see how these games are made in-house and how they work creatively. There's some really crazy out there ideas, but ones that honestly, I personally find very intriguing. I would actually like to see some of these ideas come to fruition, and as a matter of fact, some of them actually do. So without prolonging this intro any longer than it needs to be, everyone, I present to you none other than Shawn Kittlesen.
Hey MK fanatics, Shawn Kittlesen here. Want to thank History Behind the Warrior for inviting me back. It's an honor to be a guest on this channel, and to be here with you all to share some notes from the Mortal Kombat 11 scrap heap. But before we get into it, full disclaimer, I'm not here to represent WB Games, NetherRealm Studios, Skybound Entertainment, or any other entity. I'm simply here as a human being, representing my own personal thoughts, opinions, and recollections. So, I hope you enjoy this. Let's get into it. So, one thing I want to make clear is, this is not a matter of what Mortal Kombat 11 would have been, or should have been, or even really could have been. We're going to talk about the process behind the Mortal Kombat 11 story, how it developed, what the initial sort of seeds were for the story, and how we ended up at the story that you got in MK11 and Aftermath. So, think of this as an exploration of Elseworlds, what if, multiverse scenarios, things that are probably way too crazy to make it to the screen, but are really fun to play with on paper and allow us to explore all the possibilities of the world. Because, you know, where does this all start? This starts with NetherRealm Studios getting together and having a lot of discussions about what they want their next game to be. And of course, everyone's looking to Ed Boon, and he gave us all a very simple but complicated assignment, which is he wanted players to feel that even if they've known Mortal Kombat for 25 plus years, they were still unable to predict what was going to happen next. They did not know what to expect. And finding the unexpected and out of left field and out of nowhere thing that would make everything really fun and cool without being too disruptive, without disregarding the lore, that was a difficult task. So we went all over the map looking for what would work. And that included things like what we ended up with, which was a direct sequel to Mortal Kombat X, but that had a lot of new elements in it. And we also explored things like reboots, straight up, just like find a way to reboot and go into a new adventure. Whoa. Or alternate universes, where we were like, what if we just take a tangent right off from where we're at and go in some crazy new direction? What would that look like? Obviously, I don't think you would have been happy with all those things. And as you'll see, some of these ideas should never be seen. They're just fun. So with that, let's get into it. Let's see where some of our initial thinking was. All right, so where should we begin? Let's go back to the very beginning. So it's summer, fall 2016. Dominic Cincholo and I are still working on Injustice 2, getting character dialogue, multiverse content, DLC, all that stuff worked out. And we get an assignment to begin story work and breaking the story for what would become Mortal Kombat 11. And the initial assignment is very broad. Ed Boon wants us to bring him stories and come up with ideas that will give the player the feeling that even if they've known Mortal Kombat for over 25 years, they can't predict what's going to happen next. They have no idea what to expect. And within that, though, we still have to do a lot of things. We have to honor the lore that came before. We have to make sure that it's accessible for new fans. So it's a simple assignment with a very complicated execution. And so we begin coming up with stories that will fulfill the need to be unexpected. And along the way, we kind of have to work along a spectrum from things that are very expected to things that are super unexpected. And so you're probably wondering, like, well, what were these ideas? Like, is this what Mortal Kombat would have been until someone got in the way? And like, no, that's not what it is at all. What it is we had to throw as much onto paper and get as much into the conversation with Ed and with the other folks at the studio as soon as possible so that we could start talking about what the game would be in a collective sense and not just in what one person or another person wants. Because one person doesn't make this game. Dominic and I co-wrote the story, but even beyond the work that we did as writers, there's so much input that comes in from the studio and from all of the talented people that work with us on the game. So it's not a one person or even a 2-person or a 3-person show. It's a group effort, and in order to get everyone on the same page, you have to just look at a bunch of crazy ideas and start figuring out, like, no, that's not what it is. Hey, we kind of like that piece. Oh, we should take something from that. Here's what we like about each thing. And as you go through that process, one refinement after another, iteration by iteration, eventually you get to Mortal Kombat 11 and Aftermath as you know them now. So these are not what should have been or could have been or even would have been. These are the scraps. These are the notes. These are the notebook pages that you're writing down, like, oh, Mortal Kombat 11 could be this. No, it couldn't. That's terrible. Okay, crinkle it up, throw it out, start again. What could Mortal Kombat 11 be? And do it over and over again. And so let's think about what some of these early pitches were. Talk a little bit about them. I'll even read you some of them because they're kind of fun and they're silly. They're silly stuff. So one thing that I know some people have asked about, like Dark Raiden, and a question that came up for us was, what do we do at the ending of Mortal Kombat X? Because the ending of Mortal Kombat X needs to be picked up, and that's one of the reasons why the opening scene of Mortal Kombat 11 as we know it is really picking up as close as we could to the ending of Mortal Kombat X in a way that would make sense within the story. So initially, that's our kind of, what's not the easy route, but what's the most straightforward and direct route? And it would be, why don't we do a sequel-ish type vibe where it's all about the crazy Deadly Alliances. I really like the idea of Deadly Alliance. It's one of my favorite Mortal Kombat games. It sits in a very important place in my heart in the 3D era, because I know it does for a lot of fans. And so there was something about bringing back the idea of Deadly Alliances. And so we had a pitch that was about a vengeful Raiden who declares all-out war against the Netherrealm, and the heroes of Earthrealm must choose sides. Are they with Dark Raiden or are they against him? And so Scorpion, Sonya Blade, and Sub-Zero would have been convinced that Raiden had gone mad and would forge a deadly alliance with their enemies, the Netherrealm's undead rulers, Liu Kang and Kitana. And together, Liu Kang, Kitana as revenants, and Sonya Blade, Scorpion, and Sub-Zero would try to stop Raiden's march of conquest and destruction. And opposing this team of rivals would have been Raiden, obviously, but he would have allied with Emperor Kotal Khan from Outworld and gathered a dark army of warriors from Purgatory, the void between life and death. And this dark army would have included characters from past games returned to life, which again was something we knew we were all looking for all along. Now, the final battle for this would have raged at the gates of hell, where Sonya and Liu Kang's forces would have been defending the Netherrealm against Raiden and his dark army. And then one deadly alliance pitted against another in this epic battle. It's like Raiden and Kotal, Revenants and Sonya and Scorpion and Sub-Zero, bam, bam, pow. Blood would be shed, lives would be lost, and then victorious players would choose Raiden's destiny. Would the errant Thunder God be released, imprisoned, or brutally executed? Again, that's not really that good, is it? Like, there's a lot that's not good about that. But it's trying to put these pieces together, seeing how they fit, seeing how it sounds, seeing how it feels. Reading it back, I'm like, I'm glad that's not the story. I don't think we would have done it justice. It would have been an injustice, you could say. So there's a very mediocre and straightforward take on what a sequel to MKX would have been. But what about something that's a little bit crazier? Like, what if we start to like throw out the old structures and throw out some stuff? And one of the ideas that we had was, and again, these are not real names; these are like hype names that we give them, so that when we pitch it in, we can talk about it in a concise way. And this one was called Castle of the Dragon. So think Castlevania meets Mortal Kombat, an epic quest for gear, and a battle royale, and a house of horrors. Which, when you think about it, is kind of what Crypt became alongside the main game. Like, Crypt is an epic quest for gear. This would have 11 deadly champions, would have been invited to a mysterious castle, where they would meet the immortal guard of Onaga, the long-dead Dragon King. And fans of the MKX comics know I really love Onaga, and I would love to have been able to work with him in a greater story sense. But these guards would have invited the deadly champions, 11 of them, to the castle, where they would be hosting a tournament to find mortal warriors worthy of joining the immortal ranks of Onaga's elite guard. And who wouldn't want that immortality? But after the contest claims its first victim, Onaga would be resurrected in a weakened state. And as the tournament progressed, Onaga would have grown stronger with each fighter's death, like powering up. And eventually, 10 of the original 11 champions would be defeated, and those 10 would be killed or spared in varying order and with varying rewards, the player's choice. And the surviving 11th champion would continue the quest all the way down to the depths of the Dragon's Tomb, where they would battle the fully restored Onaga. Straightforward, right? Not really. That would have completely like taken the entire structure of Mortal Kombat and the story modes that you've come to know and love and changed them completely. And it would have put a lot of demands in other areas of the game that I don't know if that game, even if we had wanted to make it, would have been released in 2019, let alone 2020. So yeah, glad we didn't do that one. So again, that was an approach that it didn't really think as much about the canon. It was like, well, we'll find a way to thread the canon in there. But it was more about coming up with a really crazy scenario. And a similar scenario was MK Goes to Hell, which would have been Hellraiser meets Mortal Kombat. So a group of iconic combatants, 10 to 12 of them, because you need good guys and you need bad guys on your roster too. You need faces and you need heels. So usually when we're talking about these 10 or 12 characters, we're talking about our face team that the player is going to play as, and the heels that they're going to play against are it can be anyone, and we can fill out the roster in depth. So imagine a group, MK Goes to Hell, a group of iconic combatants, 10 to 12, have been trapped in hell by a demonic torturer, maybe even an evil Dark Raiden. And some combatants may even have been kidnapped here to this hell from alternate universes or timelines. So each fighter would have combated personalized nightmare trials, deadly hallucinations, and manifestations of their worst fears and enemies. And in these trials, we could send combatants into any scene imaginable. So not just fiery hellscapes, but anywhere, however mundane or bizarre or crazy. So those who survive the nightmare trials must fight each other in a tournament of the death, and the player would face difficult moral choices to spare or sacrifice their fellow fighters. Those choices would have determined the player's final path out of hell, and nobody would have escaped without a fight. Now, again, that's all there was. It's short. These are short ideas. But you could see a lot of the things that we were talking at in there. How could we make things unexpected? How could we bring in characters that were long dead or that were different than the versions of the characters that we have in the current timeline? How could we try to give the player more choices and more paths? And anyone who's played a game with narrative choice in it or made a game with narrative choice in it knows it is so exponentially more difficult to tell that story than it is to tell a story that's a bit simpler and more linear. And it's a lot of content to generate to try and fill all the gaps of that narrative content, narrative interactivity and choice. So you'll hear a lot of these like really high concept things like, oh, we want to do this, but trust me, had we tried to do that, again, it would have taken a lot longer to make this game, and it would not have been as accessible an experience as what you got in Mortal Kombat 11. So then we have, we've had our super canon-y, like Deadly Alliances type pitches, where it's like, oh, let's pick up right where MKX left off, let's go very straightforward. Then we have these adventures that are like, all right, let's take the characters as we know them and love them and throw them into a bizarre and unexpected new situation. But then we could go even further. And the furthest place where we could push it, and again, none of these ideas were ever serious contenders, but they were just thought starters, was to go full alternate universe. So non-canon stories, boldly reimagined characters, completely out there. MKX would be kind of left in this like zone of purgatory for a bit, where the ending would be waiting for a follow-up. Maybe at the end of this, maybe somehow the alternate universes would fold in, but ultimately we were looking at these ideas as ideas to explore without depending on MKX, without depending on the established timeline. And I guess if you think about it as a fan, I know a lot of fans would have been really upset if we hadn't picked up that thread. And so that's why we ended up picking up the thread for Mortal Kombat X and trying to make sure that the games themselves could really flow together. But initially, we went crazy. And we thought about crazy things, we had crazy conversations, we allowed ourselves to have them so we could eventually find the right ideas for the game. So you're probably wondering, like, well, what are some of these? And there are some that I would love to share, but I don't want to, just in case my friends in NetherRealm want to mine them in the future. But there are a few that I don't think they will go with, and so we could talk a little bit about those. So one, which was, probably very relevant in the era of Cyberpunk, would have been a Future Shock type premise, where it's Mortal Kombat meets Blade Runner in a bleak cyberpunk future. A world ravaged by environmental decline, where ancient sorcery and advanced science coexist. And we would have had Liu Kang and Kung Lao as like Robin Hood style heroes fighting for society's most vulnerable and fighting the shadowy tycoon Shang Tsung, who had made a killing by hoarding Earth's failing resources. This is actually kind of fun when you think about it, but again, doesn't pick up from the story that you know and love, and probably would have upset a lot of fans to just come out of left field with this. Oh man, Shang Tsung, the corporate tycoon, Liu Kang and Kung Lao are like the street kids, and they learn that the Earth is going to die and they have to stop it. There's portals and craziness. This would have been so out of left field. I think a lot of you probably would have been very upset. And we had a ton of these alternate universe things, just because they were really fun to talk about. And a lot of them were, oh, what about this era in history? Or hey, what about like a Mad Max style post-apocalypse? What about that Future Shock thing? My favorite, and the one that I knew was just like, I'm putting this out there for shits and giggles, because there's no way we're going to make this. But that's why I feel totally comfortable sharing this with you. Because again, you should see the process. And the furthest end of the spectrum of the process for me was a pitch called Tournament of Terror, which would have been Friday the 13th meets Mortal Kombat. So imagine the classic MK heroes we know and love as 20-somethings in an 80s horror movie. And it sounds crazy, but it's so crazy, it just might work. Or so I pitched. This concept leans into the horror elements of the Mortal Kombat brand for a perfect storm of fighting action, hardcore horror, and pop culture nostalgia. We would have opened at a lakeside kickboxing camp, where each night counselors are being killed off by ghosts, psychopaths, and monsters. The head counselors, Sonya, Johnny, Jax, and Liu Kang, would have had to fight to survive. And a good thing, they would have all had world-class martial arts training, just like in Three Ninjas. The tone would have been self-aware, but played straight, so similar to something like Cabin in the Woods. And there would have been a variety of settings and characters that would have borrowed from all kinds of 80s cultural milestones and influences, a lot like the Stranger Things. This would have been the Stranger Things version of Mortal Kombat. Stranger Things, Friday the 13th, take all that 80s love, mash it together. It would have been this crazy thing. And, given that MK has this history with horror icons and now with 80s action heroes, it certainly isn't out of nowhere to think of skins and think of cool stuff that could still be done with this kind of stuff. But again, as a whole game, is that the Mortal Kombat you want? Probably not. Why did we do this? Why did we even talk about it? We talked about it so that we could figure out what not to do and how far we could push the line. This was certainly pushing the line a bit too far. Now, those were some ideas from like the very, very first round. So it's August, September 2016, thereabouts. And we went to Ed and we talked to the team. And we had a lot of input and feedback. And we took all that and said, all right, let's do another round. And the idea here was to start narrowing the focus a bit and coming up with things that we would all feel really good about. We kept the Deadly Alliances pitch going. That was actually still around. and fairly like close to how it was initially pitched, except a bit tighter, so that things would make sense, character motivations and all that. But there was a problem with the Deadly Alliance's pitch, which was we all kind of recognized that it was a little predictable. That it was taking things that the fans already knew and remixing them in ways that were similar to the ways they'd seen before. And even though it gave us the opportunity to bring back the Revenants in really fun ways and do more with Liu Kang and Katana, it was a pitch that wasn't really catching fire. Nobody was really excited about it. It was like, oh yeah, this is the story you would probably get after Mortal Kombat X. Like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Which again, Ed's assignment was, let's give the players something that they can't expect. Let's give them something they can't predict. And as fun as it would have been to have this Raiden versus Netherrealm and Earthrealm, Raiden and Outworld versus Netherrealm and Earthrealm story, like, again, there's a lot of cool stuff there, but is it an unexpected and exciting game? It wasn't, at least not to all of us who were working on it. We're thinking like, yeah, like, it's all right. So we kept going. We kept talking about the adventures, and those were the things that, again, we could take, new stories with classic characters and, really iconic perennial takes on fan favorite characters, really accessible lore for mass fans. And, for core fans, bringing back some more of the classic roster, classic MK style. This was something we really wanted to do. We really wanted to bring back some of the things that, as we went from MK9 to MKX and into MK11, it's like, oh boy, we're getting really far away from some of the iconic stuff. What if people want that? Which, as you can imagine, led to some of our choices further down the road. But the negative for all of this, again, is these adventures would have been sidestepping continuity, and we would have had plans to loop it all back in together and thread the needle, so to speak. But again, I don't think it would have been as satisfying for the fans to have a whole chunk of continuity dismissed without another game to give the characters and the story their due. So as we were continuing on, some of the things that came to play, obviously there was a lot of talk about Fire and Ice type stuff, the Grandmasters. Everybody loves Scorpion and Sub-Zero, and we certainly had a few takes that would just focus exclusively on them. But again, that would have excluded a whole lot of other perspectives and a whole lot of continuity and lore, and that was one reason why we didn't go down that path. Castle of the Dragon surprisingly survived the first cut and made it to the second cut, but there were a lot of questions about how complex would this be, how much content would we need to create. We were doing all kinds of maps of the content and figuring out, how could we take essentially the same number of animation minutes that we'd produced for previous games and apply them to a brand new structure. And ultimately, it was just too much to change and disrupt from really a story mode and a series of story modes that were working and that demanded a bit more continuity than that. And in the alternate universe side, rest assured that the 80s Tournament of Terror, it was cut pretty quick. The ones that we did have were really, really cool though. And while I won't go into them because I would love to see some of those elements make it into future installments, let's just say, it was a lot of historic based stuff. It was really cool. It was stuff that was grounded. I'm a big history nerd. Dominic Chincholo, also kind of a history nerd. So he and I really dug into a lot of the influences behind Mortal Kombat, behind the films and cultures that inspired Mortal Kombat. And so there's some cool stuff. But again, if you're talking about completely alternate universes, you get some great options. You get some pros out of this. You get to expand the roster and story in unexpected ways. You really disrupt expectations. And you're potentially making a more accessible lore for new fans because you'd be starting from ground zero. And you would have really novel options and opportunities for art and visuals. But what would the bummer have been? All new can be too new for a lot of fans, and I'm one of those fans. Honestly, while we were exploring the all new, the thing we kept coming back to is it's too much new. Where's the familiar? Where's the stuff that fans come to expect and enjoy when they pick up a Mortal Kombat game? And are we honoring and respecting those fans if we take all that away from them? The other side of an alternate universe story that we really were tripping over was the fact that Injustice is also an alternate universe story. So there was certainly a bit of reluctance to be like, are we repeating ourselves? Are we creating the same stories across both titles? Which we really didn't want to do, even though we knew we wanted to have some kind of way to bring characters back, to have mirror matches, to have all of that fun stuff in the story mode. We didn't want it to be exactly like Injustice and have, hey, it's the other universe over, here they come. We wanted something different. And I think that's what ultimately informed the process as we moved out of round 2 into round 3, where we really narrowed the pitches down. So now we've gone through a couple of rounds. We started really wide with everything from a Deadly Alliance's Influence sequel to a Tournament of Terror 80s pitch, to really figuring out what was wrong with all those pitches. And by figuring out what wasn't working with those pitches, we were able to figure out a lot more about what we knew we wanted. What were the things that were non-negotiable that had to be in the story? One of those things was obviously we wanted to pick up from MKX. We knew we wanted to pick up from MKX because it would have been disrespectful to tease the fans with the MKX ending and then not follow up on that later. Like, it just didn't feel right. So that was a big one. But we also knew that we needed ways to bring in characters who had been killed in previous games, that we needed ways to subvert expectations, and really that we needed ways to go big, to celebrate, because we started thinking, well, this is, if we follow MK9, MKX, if this is the third in a trilogy and we're going to treat it as the third in a trilogy, how do we make it bigger? How do we make it bigger and crazier than we've ever seen? And so that then led to the third round of pitches. And the third round of pitches are a lot more, let's say, realistic in terms of what could have been a good Mortal Kombat game story. And among those third round of pitches is the pitch that ultimately became Mortal Kombat 11. So really, it was out of this round that Ed Boon zeroed in on oh, that's it. That's Mortal Kombat 11. And we'll talk about a few of these. So, for example, one of the pitches was called Enemies Within. And the final boss would have been my boy Onaga, because I keep trying. Gotta always give Onaga a shot. He'll get there. He'll get there eventually. Fans, you know we love Onaga. Just like I know you love Havoc. I love Havoc too. We keep on loving them. Eventually they'll come back. I have to believe. So let's talk about this one. Enemies Within. Final boss, Onaga. Lords of the Realms, Dark Raiden, Revenant Liu Kang, and Kotal Khan are shocked when all their staunchest allies rebel at the same time. The rebels help a fourth rival, Onaga, to attack all three realms at once: Earthrealm, Netherrealm, and Outworld. But why are otherwise loyal followers supporting this new Dragon King? Raiden solves the mystery. Followers of Onaga have actually been replaced by Shang Tsung's clones. Onaga saved Shang from death, and now Shang Tsung is capturing and cloning combatants to build Onaga's army. So as the Dragon King's power grows, Raiden, Liu Kang, and Kotal Khan would have had to unite to fight to free their followers and crush Shang Tsung's army of clones, ultimately to defeat Onaga. So the lead story here really would have been Raiden, Liu Kang, and Kotal Khan battling Shang Tsung's clones to save the realms from Onaga. Some of the character stories that kicked around were like, okay, maybe to help win the war, would Sub-Zero give his life, maybe even to save an enemy, and in so doing, become a hero to another realm, like Outworld or Netherrealm? What if Shang Tsung tried to buy Scorpion's loyalty, promising him clones of his dead family? What if Mileena was reborn, stronger and deadlier, thanks to Shang Tsung's clone army? Sonya and Kitana, what if they faced their fiercest enemies, armies of Sonya and Kitana clones? And, for example, Revenant Kung Lao, what if he sided with Onaga, craving the respect he feels he is owed to him? Because we know Kung Lao's got this chip on his shoulder in that timeline, where it's like, man, everybody's really feeling Liu Kang, but if they only knew how cool Kung Lao is, they'd be all about it. So, again, you're starting to see some of the things that ultimately work their way into the game, and some of the values that work their way into the game, which is we wanted to maintain continuity. We wanted to present a story that was fit within the structure of the NetherRealm story modes while still introducing some new elements. And we were really looking for ways to bring back old characters. We were really looking for ways to fill out the roster with surprising characters and make choices that, again, nobody would expect. But of course, there were some problems. Clones? Are they exciting? I don't know. There wasn't really, there isn't an emotional reaction to clones. So, although Enemies Within was cool, the idea of clone versions is cool, we thought we could do some cooler things. We had other pitches. Deathly Alliance. Still in there, no longer an Onaga pitch. We moved Onaga into another insert, so we're coming up with new pitches. And this one would have been, Raiden absorbs Shinnok's evil in MKX, and it curses him, poisoning his soul until he becomes the aggressive Dark Raiden, terrorizes the Netherrealm. And his attacks would escalate until, all across Earthrealm and Outworld, the dead rise and attack the living. This is Night of the Living Dead meets Mortal Kombat. Walking Dead, my current home, meets Mortal Kombat. Blaming Revenant Liu Kang for the dead rising, even though it's really his fault and he doesn't realize it. Dark Raiden would have retaliated against the Netherrealm, but he would then learn the dead are not rising under Liu Kang's command. He would have learned it's Raiden's curse that is spread across Earthrealm, summoning these cursed souls. And cursed souls, again, we were looking for the way to bring characters in. So we had clones in the previous pitch, now we're talking about cursed souls. Earthrealm and the Netherrealm would have formed an alliance to break the curse that Raiden had inherited from Shinnok, but it would have been too late. The curse would have completed, summoning a new character who would have been a deadly spirit whose violent power would threaten all the realms. And really what was most important about this new character was that they become a darker counterpart to a Dark Raiden. So the lead story here is really Raiden fighting his cursed self and forging an alliance with the Netherrealm to defeat this greater evil that he has unleashed and redeem himself. Some of the character stories we talked about, what if Sub-Zero is stalked by cursed souls of Noob Saibot, Smoke, Cyrax, and Sector? Obviously, we always wanted to bring in as much of the Lin Kuei in their past as possible. What if Scorpion battled a cursed Scorpion for a chance to reunite with his dead wife and son? What if Johnny and Sonya were ambushed by cursed former comrades Nightwolf and Cabal? Because we do remember the continuity, even when it gets changed. Revenants Liu Kang and Kitana defend the Netherrealm against Raiden and the Darkness. That was obviously something that made its way into MK11, was this idea of, hey, Revenant Liu Kang and Revenant Kitana are the leaders of the Netherrealm now. We need to have them represented here. And finally, what if we had cursed Goro, cursed Baraka, cursed Shao Kahn, leading a whole cursed horde against Kotal Khan and the living Outworld. Again, cool things that we thought about, and some of that stuff kind of made its way into MK11, even though it's not quite it. We had another pitch called The End of All Realities. And this was another one where it would have been another final boss for Evil Raiden. So that's pretty cool. Evil Raiden, final boss, Dark Raiden. And this was an expanding rift in the fabric of space and time is destroying the realms. To close the breach and save the realms from extinction, Dark Raiden and Kotal Khan travel to the parallel universe where the rift originated. Again, alternate universes. But this universe is a cracked reflection of our own. Shinnok leads Outworld. Shao Kahn protects Earthrealm. Their foe is a fallen Elder God, an evil Raiden, who created the rift in the multiverse. As the realms disintegrate, our familiar MK characters join with parallel universe counterparts to defeat Evil Raiden and save the multiverse. So this is, again, we would have had Dark Raiden, and he still would have been kind of not all good, not all bad, but then we would have had Evil Raiden, who was like, whoa, Dark Raiden? You don't even know! You don't even know! It would have been Dark Raiden and Kotal Khan leading multiverse combatants against Evil Raiden to save all reality. This is, again, playing with the notion of, how do we make Raiden, who's going down this dark path, face what he's becoming? Character stories we talked about. What if Scorpion was reunited with parallel universe versions of his family? Again, we were really coming around, like, we want to find a way to address Scorpion and his family in a meaningful way in this game, because it resonated so well in previous games. Sub-Zero. What if he prevented the untimely death of his parallel universe brother, Bi-Han? And we have a good Bi-Han in the mix all of a sudden. What if Kung Jin met his parallel self, steering him from a self-destructive path? We were throwing Kung Jin in there. This was early on. Anyone could have shown up. What if Johnny stayed in the parallel universe to raise parallel universe Cassie, who would have still been a young girl and still needed guidance after her parents died in that universe. And finally, like, what if Revenant Liu Kang ultimately just chose to side with evil Raiden to conquer the multiverse? And we would have had, again, this powerful character coming in from outside of the universe and timeline, meeting up with Revenant Liu Kang and forming an alliance, kind of like what ended up happening with Kronika and the Revenants in Mortal Kombat 11. Now, the last pitch is the one that Ed Boon made the call. He was reading pitches and he was like, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. And it was called Time of Death. So this is the original-ish MK11 pitch. But remember, this is very incomplete. This is super half-baked. And once it's tested against the structure of the fight ladder and the chapters, and we're talking about the roster and who's going to be in and who's going to get screen time and how much, things change and move around. So even if there are things about this that sound good on paper, they didn't necessarily work out in practice, and that's why we had to modify it as we worked our way through MK11. But do you want to hear it? Do you want to hear the original Time of Death pitch? Here we go. So, at the end of MKX, Raiden decapitates the Elder God Shinnok. This provokes the wrath of Shinnok's father, originally Kronikos, Lord of Time, a hulking titan older than the universe. Kronikos merges 3 different eras: MKX, MK1, and a new, uncharted MK Future. Characters and settings from all 3 eras appear simultaneously in the same world. And here, in this time-merged world, Kronikos is supreme. To finish Raiden and our heroes, Kronikos unleashes deadly future killers and former heroes with vendettas against them. Champions from across history would join forces to then save the timeline. The lead story here really is Raiden unites the heroes of 3 different MK eras, past, present, and future, against the evil forces of Kronikos. Some of the character stories we talked about initially. What if Scorpion joins Kronikos to change his tragic past and becomes one of the future killers? What if Sub-Zero faces his corrupt brother, the original Sub-Zero, now an agent of Kronikos? What if young Johnny and Sonya encounter their future daughter, Cassie Cage? And what if evil revenants Liu Kang and Kitana fight against naive young Liu and Kitana? In an Outworld, what if Kotal Khan contends with Kronikos' favorite emperor, Shao Kahn? Now you can see here, there's actually quite a bit that made it into MK11. And one of the big chunks that did not was having this idea of a third timeline, having this future timeline. This, again, some of it came in from working on the Future Shock pitch that we had initially. We were like, oh, future's cool. So many cool skins we could do with the future. But ultimately, that would have made the story so much more complicated. And it felt much cleaner to just have it be a straight up past versus present. Like, past and present meet, boom, collide. And that was where the most interesting interactions were. Clearly things like young Johnny and Sonya meeting Cassie and their older selves. And I think it may even have been that really sold everyone on the pitch, was just the idea of like, hey, you can have Johnny Cage meet Johnny Cage, and both Johnnies think the other Johnny is a dick. That's fun. That's a lot of fun. And then there's also the more resonant stuff of like, wow, what if you take a younger Raiden, a good Raiden, and show him what Dark Raiden is? And again, there were versions of the story where Dark Raiden was there for a lot longer. There were versions where there were 2 Raidens. I think what we ultimately went with was the cleanest, most straightforward version of that story so that we could really get a strong arc of redemption for Raiden and Liu Kang. But again, this is where it started. This is a half-page paragraph that's just like the seed of an idea. And the seed of the idea was past meets present. That's what the team loved. That's what got the green light. And that's how we started writing Mortal Kombat 11. So that's kind of a lot, huh? It's so much. There's so much that we went through. I'm not even sharing all of the ideas here. I'm giving you like a glimpse into the process and all of the stuff that we went through on the road to charting Mortal Kombat 11. Personally, I'm really happy with the way Mortal Kombat 11 and Aftermath turned out. I hope all of you like it too. And if you don't like it, I hope you lovingly don't like it. Because this game, Mortal Kombat 11, was made with love by people that love Mortal Kombat. Trust in that. Trust that even if things aren't exactly as you would want them, someone made every inch and every pixel in that game with love. And there really isn't any one person's vision of MK11 that becomes the thing. Ed Boon is the lens through which all things go into the game, but I don't even think Ed gets everything he wants out of the games. There are plenty of times where I'm pretty sure Ed looked at Dominic and I and said, like, all right, guys, that's not where I would go with it, but you seem really into it, so I'm going to go with your guts on this. And we appreciate having that kind of trust and collaboration. Like, that's the kind of creative relationship that you want when you're making a game like this. You want people who can feed on each other, and you want people who can give each other's ideas a chance. And I'm really, really glad that I had the opportunity to work on this game with the team at NetherRealm and with all the folks at WB Games. And I'm super duper stoked to see the future of Mortal Kombat as a fan, now that I'm no longer working with NetherRealm. So again, don't take any of this as, oh my god, that's what the game would have been. No, the game was never going to be any of these ideas that we've talked about today. These were whiteboard ideas. These were notebooks, scrap ideas. This was the scrap heap. And out of the scrap heap is where you get the more refined and polished product that is Mortal Kombat 11 and ultimately Aftermath. So, with that, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks again to History Behind the Warrior. Shout out to everyone at NetherRealm who worked on this game with me, especially my co-writer Dominic Ciancholo. We're brothers for life after going through these wars together. And love to all the fans. Thank you so much for supporting Mortal Kombat. Thank you for supporting the MKX comics when I worked on those. And I hope you check out my book Heart Attack from Skybound and Image, which is a completely different thing. So if you like teenage romance and a light touch of superpowers and a heavy dose of political commentary, go check out Heart Attack. It's pretty cool, and I'm super proud of that too. So with that, thank you all, and I'll see you all next time.
Yes, that's it for the early drafts of Mortal Kombat 11. I hope you all have enjoyed this, and massive thank you again to Shawn for making this all possible. This was a lot of fun to actually listen to. As a fan of the series, I like to see the different ideas and drafts as well as directions that the game could have gone in. You know, as Shawn said at the very end, no idea is finalized until development properly starts on it. So this is definitely a mild glimpse of what could have been, as it just seems like there's a lot of layers and different levels to how this story is created, like how Chronicos was turned into Chronica. That's a pretty interesting story behind it, but now that it has been told, I don't believe much more needs to be said about it. Now, I'll probably explore some of these ideas later down the line, as I do like a lot of the concepts here. But until then, that's been it for myself and Shawn. Please, please, please do follow Shawn on Twitter. I will have a link for all of his socials down in the description below, so please do hop over and support him on Twitter as well as his work at Skybound, and last but not least, his comic book series Heart Attack. Well, that's it for me for the time being. I do hope you have enjoyed this, and it's given you a little bit more insight on the creation process of the Mortal Kombat games as a whole. I would love to do more videos like this in the future, so who knows, me and Shawn could collaborate once again. But as mentioned, this is it for myself and Shawn, so before this video wraps up, if possible, let's try getting it to about 500 likes, and please do not forget to take that bell, as there's plenty more Mortal Kombat content on the horizon, including some movie stuff, so that will be interesting. But until then, that's been it for me. Now, as always, please comment, like, subscribe, and share this video with everyone you know. Please take care, and I will see you all next time.